Welcome, everybody, to the 52nd episode of the JewishDrinking.com show. I'm your host, Rabbi Drew Kaplan, and I'm very excited to have first-time guest on, Rabbi Chaim Litvin, the Bourbon Rabbi.
Hey, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Now, for those of you out there who don't know Rabbi Litvin, so he is one of the Chabad rabbis in Louisville, Kentucky, not Louisville, right?
Said it
Or
well.
Louisville.
That's great.
Just Louisville. And in addition to being one of the Chabad rabbis in Louisville, Kentucky, he also does various kosher supervision work, hashgacha, and one of the things that he supervises is bourbon in the state of Kentucky, correct?
That's right.
And really cool, I actually found out about him because someone else saw his Instagram and texted it over to me. He's got this Bourbon Rabbi branding Instagram account. And can you show us your shot glass?
Yeah, the shot glass is here.
There we go. Yes, so he's got the branding down. And speaking of your shot glass, what are you drinking this evening?
I have Parker's Heritage Edition. Delicious bourbon.
Schmancy. Nice. All right, and I got some Kentucky liquid as well. It's nothing fancy. It's just Jefferson's, not even the reserve. It's just Jefferson. So, L'chaim.
L'chaim.
All righty. So, I'm very excited about this particular conversation. So let's just start off really simply. So what is your involvement in a professional manner, in a professional capacity with the bourbon industry down in Kentucky?
So, my involvement with the bourbon industry. So, I'm a rabbi here in Louisville. I was born here. I'm actually the first rabbi to be born in Louisville and come back to serve here. So I went away to school, got my smicha, I got married, moved back here about 10 or 11 years ago. My father runs a kosher organization here. We certify all kinds of stuff, from the sugar that goes into Coke to bourbon to colors to popcorn to peanut butter, you name it, it might be made here. So we've been doing that for a long time. Even before I was married, I would help out in that and had a lot of experience with that. When I came back, we started doing a little more with the bourbon industry. Companies like Heaven Hill, which we've been certifying for over 30 years. When I was a kid, my dad helped them with the selling the chametz for as far back as I can remember.
Do they still do that?
Sorry?
Do they still do that?
Yeah, they still do that to this day. Even this year was a little complicated because of COVID. To get everybody in a room, sign papers, make everything official. But yeah, we got it done this year as well. And that's been set for for a long time. So when I moved back and was dealing with them and dealing with a few others, it kind of grew. I had a little more interest in the bourbon side. Kind of had a little passion for it. Enjoyed a little more than peanut butter or popcorn. So kind of focused on that side of it. And the Wall Street Journal actually did an article about me in 2017.
Oh, really?
Wall Street Journal, and kind of nicknamed me the Bourbon Rabbi, and it kind of just snowballed from there.
They nicknamed you that. Wasn't something you took upon yourself. They got, all right.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. I have to check that article out.
I'll send you a link.
Yeah, please do.
I think it's from 2017. So
from that
it should still
article,
be up there in their archives.
So from that article, you took on this moniker of the Bourbon Rabbi, or nickname.
Yeah. So not in every day. My wife doesn't call me Bourbon Rabbi, but it kind of grew from there. A few more distilleries, and a few more. I started doing bourbon tastings and lectures around the country. And since COVID, I've been doing a few virtual ones. Hopefully the world settles back down, everybody's healthy, and we can go enjoy together, not just on these Zoom ones. And it's just grown from that.
How many different distilleries are you doing hashgacha supervision at?
There's actually a bunch of different certifying agencies that certify bourbon, and I work with a lot of them.
So you're like their man on the ground in Kentucky, basically.
Yeah, so I'm not the only one. There are other mashgichim that do come through. I'm the closest and easiest to get to all of them.
Yeah.
There's one that comes from Cincinnati, for example, but to get down to Bardstown from Cincinnati is probably about a 2-hour, maybe 3-hour drive.
Mm-hmm.
It's about 35 minutes
Can
for
you
me.
share his name?
Yeah, Rabbi Levy. He works for the OU. I think he does Jim Beam for the OU. That's a certified
nice.
company. Michter's is certified by the Circle K. Buffalo Trace works with CRC for a couple products. So there's a bunch of organizations, and I help all of them however I can. And then we have our own brand, our own certification that does kosher for companies like Heaven Hill and Peerless. We're working with Limestone, and in Radcliffe, Kentucky, there's a Boundary Oak Distillery. So there's a whole bunch of distilleries certified by a bunch of different agencies.
Mm-hmm.
And the goal is really just to get more products certified so that people can enjoy.
Do you pop into or bump into these other fellow mashgichim, fellow kosher supervisors of bourbon around? Are you in touch with them?
Once, actually, a good friend of mine works for the OK, and he came down for a more annual visit. It wasn't one of the local routes. It was a visit from the central office, and I didn't know he was coming, but he came and was actually a classmate of mine. So we got to hang out for a bit. It was a year or two ago. So yeah, from time to time I do bump in. But when someone comes in from out of town, usually they'll stop in for a minyan or something. It doesn't happen so much the last couple of months. But when someone does come into town, I usually will bump into them either at the Chabad house or somewhere along the way. There's only one store that really has a significant amount of kosher food, so if they're buying something, there's a good chance they can bump in there. The chances of actually bumping in at a distillery are pretty slim, but I guess could happen.
Yeah, crazier things have happened. How open are distilleries to having hashgacha? Like, is this something that they reach out to the supervising agencies, or is this more of or the agencies reaching out to the distilleries?
So it happens both ways. Most of it is initiated by the agencies themselves. Mm-hmm. There are some that reach out to get it on their own. It's really an education thing. A lot of the, especially the smaller distilleries, don't have a big marketing team, don't have a big marketing budget, aren't really aware. They're trying to make a craft product the best way they can, and they do a really good job. And they kind of leave it to the distributors to do all their marketing and figure out how to get the most amount of product to the most amount of people, and are kind of not really on that side and don't see it until there's some kind of education and they understand that you're opening up to a bigger market. It's not just the Jewish market, but people view kosher in general, not just in whiskey, as more of like a good housekeeping seal of approval. That it's a better a quality product, a higher standard, and it gives it that aura, and that also kind of helps get that ball rolling.
Yeah, that's cool. What are common kashrut concerns when it comes to distilleries, and maybe more specifically, I'm not worried about Scotch, but we're going to be really Kentucky specific here when it comes, especially to bourbon or other whiskeys produced in the state of Kentucky. What are common kashrut concerns that pop up around those?
All right, so there's
and you know what? I'm just going to throw up the follow-up question so you can just answer it all at once. And what about any remedies towards some of these concerns?
All right, so there's a few concerns. In a really small distillery, they're making one type of product one way. They're not adding any flavors. They're not doing any fancy things. They're really kind of doing it as traditional as they can, back to the way it was done pre-Prohibition or during or right after Prohibition, that style. And it's really, a lot of these places are farm to bottle. They're growing the corn. Usually they'll be buying the barley. It doesn't really grow in this region. Rye, kind of hit or miss. Usually they're buying that as well. But a lot of them are growing their own corn or getting it from a farm, within a mile or a few miles of their distillery. They're milling it themselves. They're fermenting it. They're distilling it. They're barreling it. They're bottling it. Doing everything in-house. And there isn't really a way for some of them to become non-kosher. So you don't have that concern with those smaller ones. But a bigger company like Jim Beam, a Heaven Hill, a Buffalo Trace, which has thousands and thousands of products with They make cognacs and vodkas and flavored vodkas, flavored whiskeys, wines, all this kind of stuff that has intrinsically non-kosher items in them. So then you have to be worried about cross-contamination between those tanks, those lines, those bottling things, to make sure that it stays kosher. So even in one of the bigger distilleries, in the barrel itself, it's most likely kosher. The problems really are once it leaves the barrel, what happens? Another, besides the flavors that can happen in the bigger distilleries, and even some of the smaller distilleries do flavors as well, so it could be a problem there as well. For the most part, they aren't. But also, a lot of distilleries aren't really distilleries. So they're called non-distiller producers.
Okay.
So having an actual still is an expensive thing to buy. You have to have someone that knows how to use it. You need a master distiller, someone that's really good at creating a product that you can tell when you make the actual mash bill and ferment and distill that in 3, 5, 10 years after it leaves the barrel, it's going to be a good product. It really takes a skill. It's an art. And I mean, there's the Beam family, dates back, 7 or 8 generations of teaching down to their kids. They how to do it. And
it's real
they're
Masorah.
really good at it.
It's real Masorah.
To just walk in and just you put a bunch of things in there, hope it comes out good, and bank on it. I mean, you're investing a lot of money and sitting on it and waiting, and then if it isn't any good, then you wasted all your time.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of NDPs, non-distiller producers, will buy barrels of bourbon from producers that have a good track record, and they'll either blend it or just bottle it as is, or cut it, or make their product from something that someone else distilled. Mm-hmm. It's very common in the industry. There's a company in Indiana that basically only does that. That's all they make is stuff to sell to non-distiller producers. Mm-hmm. They don't have. I think now they started to have their own lines, but for a long time they didn't even make their own labels. They were just making it for other people. And they're not the only. There's a bunch of them. You can buy barrels from middlemen or depots, for lack of a better word. And so if you're buying a barrel, so then it's still in the barrel, it should be fine. But if you're buying it from one of these big producers and you get it in one of these 18-wheeler trucks, so is that truck kosher? And then if you don't have a distilling facility, you may not have a bottling facility. So where is it getting bottled? Is that facility kosher? So it's all these end problems. It's not really a problem for the most part in the barrel, but once it leaves the barrel, you have all these kind of questions about transport, flavors, bottling, all come into play really after it leaves the barrel. Another problem is the problem of chametz owned on Pesach, chametz over with Pesach. And there's a bunch of distilleries that are owned by Jews.
That's like a worse problem for bourbon than Scotch, right? It's more of a widespread problem because
there's a lot more bourbon distilleries owned by Jews. Yeah, definitely.
And you mentioned Heaven Hill.
Heaven Hill is owned by Jews that sell their chametz. Buffalo Trace, for example, only sells the stock of 3 products over the week of Pesach. They did a release mid-April this year. They released it on the last day of Pesach. That stock was sold as a kosher product. Sorry?
They set aside 1,000 barrels for this, and that they're over the different years they're going to be releasing this line.
So they're going to continuously do it each year. They're going to put away a set of barrels each year, and then release a 7-year-old product every year. So it'll be one release in April each year, but that's the only stuff that they make that they do that sale with. Distribution, that if the distributor is Jewish, could be problematic. And that's a whole halachic technical question about, do they actually own it? Are they middlemen? Does the store own it? Does the distillery still own it? The distillery is still responsible for it. So it's a complicated halachic question that's above my pay grade.
Yeah, same. Or at least at this moment. Maybe one day I'll actually figure that distribution stuff out. But aside from Heaven Hill, how many, and aside from the very small release of the Buffalo Trace stuff, how many other places sell their chametz? How many other distilleries are doing that? in Kentucky?
None that I know of.
Oh, so it's really just Heaven Hill and those.
There are a few others that are owned
Well,
by.
New Riff started doing it. I think in 2019 they began selling their chametz.
Right, that's right. New Riff does.
So the Cincinnati Vibe.
Right.
Yeah.
So their older stock was still owned over Pesach, which is problematic.
But in 2019 and 2020, so it's a start. So you
I
know,
mean,
looking
you got to
towards the
start
future.
somewhere.
Yeah,
Right. Buffalo Trace did this 7 years ago. They should have done their whole company, and then although Weller, Buffalo Trace, Eagle, it'll all be fine.
Yeah.
They own a significant portion of the bourbon industry. They're the third biggest. So it's a shame that not everything they make is good. But maybe one day.
How does it work with Heaven Hill? Like, do they have to shut things down, or they sell it to like?
The company is sold, and the owners don't go in. They don't own it. They don't work there.
Yeah. And the profits and all that stuff. Where does that money go? Some Gentile for a week plus.
So someone does make some significant money that week.
Okay.
When I guess when it's bought back, it's all hashed out.
Okay. What are their different Heaven Hill products? What do they cover?
Heaven Hill makes like 3,000 products. Not all of them are certified. They have some things that are intrinsically non-kosher, like their Christian Brother brandy, for example, has wine in it.
Oh wow.
So they do have some things that aren't kosher. But anything they make that's single barrel is kosher. Elijah Craig is kosher. Evan Williams, Henry McKenna, and a bunch of others I can't remember off the top of my head.
It's great. I mean, you know bourbon better than I do, so this is great. I'm learning. Awesome. Yeah, because I'm still learning about which companies are owned by Jews and have chametz, and I still don't know all that stuff. So, but yeah, all right, cool. So that's good that some of them are at least open to it. To the hashgacha.
Yeah, and then the other kosher issue would be finishes. If you have a bourbon and you're going to finish it in a wine cask, port or sherry, were those barrels kosher? Usually not. There's actually a bourbon that does use kosher port casks. It's called Boondocks. It's owned by Royal Wine, and they have a port finish. I believe it's port, and it's available on the market.
Although, what wasn't Angel's Envy using kosher barrels?
Angel's Envy actually did a run in 2012 with Kedem barrels.
Yeah.
But Kedem is now using those barrels for their own product, which is called Boondocks.
Oh, I guess. But technically, you could, I mean, from the Gemara, from the Shulchan Aruch, you could use those barrels for beer, whiskey, whatever. Even from the non-kosher wines, right?
So it's a great question. It's been debated. There's books written about it.
Right. So the different kashrut organs or agencies have different standards, basically.
Basically, most agencies. There's no all in anything.
Okay.
But the standard, at least in America, is that if it says port or sherry on it, then it was done l'shvach, and therefore, it was done for a benefit on the flavor side, and therefore makes it not good. If it doesn't say,
that sounds like that sounds like all American kashrut agencies struggle with this problem.
I don't know of any. I do not know of any kashrut agency in America that certifies a product with sherry or port casks that aren't kosher casks.
Okay, interesting. Even though it's a machlokas why it's okay in the Gemara, why it's okay in the Shulchan Aruch to use wine casks for beer.
So the simple answer is that in the Gemara it says that it gives a bad taste to it.
It doesn't say that. It actually doesn't say that at all. So in the Gemara we have there's actually 4 different Amoraic opinions there in the Gemara. They talk about storing beer in a little flask that had previously held Gentile wine, and we have, I don't remember exactly who the two earlier rabbis are who find it to be problematic, but then Rava, who was this incredible, great Amora, who also was like this huge wine guy in the Bavli, and then I think it was either Rav Ashi, some or Ravina, one of the two, who then said it's fine. And because we typically go like the later generations of Amoraim and not like the earlier generations, so we permit. And so since these two later rabbis, these two later Amoraim said it's fine, so that's why. And there's zero explanation given. Although Rashi there on the spot there, he says because the beer, the flavor is so overpowering of whatever was remaining in the container that it's okay. And that seems to be, it's not clear again in the Shulchan Aruch why this is okay. The Shulchan Aruch codifies what's there in the Gemara. It's not clear again. There's zero reason ascribed why this would be okay. And then I think it's the Shach. I don't remember if it's the Taz or I think it's the Shach maybe, who says, just like Rashi, that because the beer is able to overpower whatever wine's remaining in this container. So there are some other opinions, right?
Definitely. It's a machlokas. That's what a machlokas is.
Right. So that's one side. And that obviously you can tell which side of the machlokas I'm on. I'm on the Rashi.
Drink it.
I'm on the Rashi Shach side that says the beer overpowers whatever wine's left. But on the other side, with the tour.
So on that side though, is you're assuming that the liquid you're putting in overpowers what the wine is. But if the point 100%. Of putting, well,
100%. I'm on Rava's side. I'm on Rava's and Rashi's side.
If the point of putting the liquid into the barrel is to get the flavor from the barrel, then it's not doing that. So in the case of the beer, in the case of the Gemara, the beer is overpowering it, and it doesn't matter, and they're just storing it there.
Unless you think whiskey.
And that's how we paskin. That's how we paskin.
And by the way, unless you think the whiskey's weaker than the beer, right? And then that's a different variable in the equation.
Right. But so just straight from that, we paskin that if you hold that the beer overpowers the wine, then that makes it okay, right? Which means that they didn't put the beer in the barrel to get the flavor of the wine. It was done as storage.
Well,
when it's done on purpose to get the flavor, so it's not overpowering, you're taking that flavor, and that's why you're doing it. So that's where the opinion comes from that it isn't good. That's that side. So now you see both sides.
Right.
And most American kosher organizations paskin on the stricter side, and that it doesn't overpower if they did it for that reason. So you have in
by the way,
Scotland, for example.
I should mention, by the way, the Rava, the Ravina, the Rashi, the Shach side, the dominating side would say that, like, sure, there's still some like wine taste, yeah, whatever, but A, sort of the intent really doesn't matter, but also B, is it really that much winey anymore, right? It's like, okay.
I mean, taste something that's finished in sherry and taste something that isn't. I mean,
no, but what I'm saying is that it's a different variable. It's not really that much winey. Sure, you can get some wine out of it, but it's not real wine.
If you're enjoying this conversation, this debate, this discussion with Rabbi Litvin, you should check out next week's episode featuring Joshua Schwartz, in which we delve in deeply into the topic. And here is a sneak peek into next week's episode.
He says it's fine. Again, just like the Talmud, though, no reason is offered, right? It's fine.
Right.
Just as long as he says, you got to get rid of the wine residue that's still hanging out, the wetness. But as long as you rinse that off, great. He's not worried about anything that could be hanging out inside of whatever the container is, whatever it's made of, just as long as you don't just have wine splashing around in there. Do you have good stories? Any crazy stuff? Things that have shocked or otherwise surprised you?
There's a lot of cool things when you hang out in the distilleries. You talk to the people there, especially people that have been doing it for their families have been doing it for generations, and you get all these old stories and all this history is really really pretty cool. One cool example is Peerless Distillery. Is one of the ones that I certify.
Yeah.
They were actually started before Prohibition by the current owner's great-great-grandfather. who was Jewish. His name was Henry Craver. He came here from Europe. Gave a wagon driver all his money and said, "Drop me off wherever this gets me. Like, bring me that far." He ended up in Henderson, Kentucky, with nothing. He slept in the bar in exchange for cleaning it up. Eventually owned a bar, owned a distillery, owned a couple banks. He actually bought the Palmer Hotel in Chicago. Prohibition came, and he had to shut his still down. He sold everything to Al Capone, but he got rid of all of his inventory. And then a couple generations later, his great grandson, resurrected that brand, and actually found out that the Jewish cemetery in Henderson, the upkeep for it was paid for by Henry Craver, who was the original owner of Peerless, and their family actually still takes care of that till today, just because that's what their father did, and their father, and their father, and they still take care of that till today.
One of the it sounds surprising. It's funny because having heard you say earlier that you're the very first ever Louisville-born and bred rabbi to ever return. And so for rabbis to return after one generation is like unheard of in Kentucky. Whereas for folks in the bourbon industry, 4 generations is like nothing. You talked about the beans.
Yeah. There's families that are 7-8 generations in.
Yeah.
Such
a different.
In almost all of the major distilleries, there's actually someone employed from the Beam family. Heaven Hill, Limestone, Jim Beam, obviously. Who else? I'm not sure about Wild Turkey. I think Wild Turkey as well.
Oh, well, they have a few generations of Russells there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jimmy Russell was actually really just sitting down with him with a bourbon and hearing stories from him is just phenomenal.
That's great. So you have this Bourbon Rabbi brand, which apparently only got, coined out of this article. So you also are now getting your hands into bourbon and, slinging bourbon. So what's that process been like? And do you mind sharing what you've got something coming out this fall, and then also another product, hopefully pre-Purim, right?
Yeah, so I'm actually in the final stages of finalizing a bourbon for release before Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah.
We'll be able to ship to most of the United States, be able to get it to your table before Simchas Torah. Those details are being finalized now. My mash bill has been set. The barrels are aging. I did a barrel pick actually today. So I don't know when you see this, but on today, I did the barrel pick earlier this morning. So it's
pick out the mash bill. How do you get to differentiate and figure out how much barley or rye or whatever else you're tossing in with the corn?
So it's really you go by taste, see what you like, but you also want something that it's not just something you like; it's something that will appeal to a broader audience. So you kind of ask people the type of bourbons that they enjoy, and kind of figure what the common denominator is. So so in order for it to be a bourbon, it has to be at least 51% corn, and it can have the rest of it has to come from other grains. Mine is a high wheat, which means it's got other examples of a high wheat would be a Maker's Mark, Larceny are both high wheated bourbons. Bernheim has one as well, a wheated whiskey. So there's a lot out there, and a lot of people really enjoy that. The wheat kind of brings like a mellowness to it, a little less harsh, a little fruitier usually. And this one is just it's a really great barrel. It's going to make a phenomenal product.
How open are distilleries to people coming in like you're doing for a barrel?
So it depends on the distillery. It depends. A lot of them actually, right now, the tourist side of it is much slower because of COVID. So there's a lot of revenue. So it doesn't affect the bigger ones as much, but a lot of the smaller ones rely on that revenue to get by.
Really?
So when they can't do that, they need to supplement that with something. So right now, it's a little easier and there's a little more available. But my process started a while back, so it didn't really, have that much effect for this. But in general, it's you have to know someone to be able to. You have to be able to get to the right person in the right distillery.
It's who you know. It's who you know.
Yeah, it's who you know.
Yeah. It's like the rest of the world. Let's be
Yep.
honest.
Same.
Right. No different. Okay, cool. It sounds exciting. And how much, what's the quantity of the releases? Whether for the fall?
My first release will only have 100 bottles.
100 bottles. Okay. And then
Yeah, we're going to limit it to 100 bottles. I think the price point's going to be $60.
Mm-hmm.
And that'll be just for the first release. And I don't have those details yet for my second release, which will be before Purim. We're working on one at a time.
Will the second release, the pre-Purim one, will that be under the Bourbon Rabbi label?
Most probably.
And people can find out more details whenever they pop up on the bourbonrabbi.com website?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, as the information is official and available, it will be on the website. Nothing on it now. You heard it first.
Yeah, exclusive.
Yeah. So as it'll be available, it'll be there. The bottles won't be able to be purchased through me directly because of the legalities and liquor licenses and distributors and all kinds of rules. But there'll be a link to get it on the website eventually. As well.
Great. Rabbi Litvin, I actually, when I told you that someone had sent me an Instagram link to your Instagram account, one of the great things I noticed was that you have these like 7.5 minute clips on IGTV of these like tastings in Torah. So what are they and how often do you publish them?
Yeah, so that kind of started because of COVID. I was at home, wasn't able to do the regular teaching and learning that I was doing in the community. So I just went online, did a quick little thing about the portion or something that was happening that week, either from Perkei Avos or the Parsha, or a holiday coming up, and then did a tasting on just a different bourbon each week. We do it every week, Thursday at 10 p.m. It's live on Instagram, on Facebook Live, and then it gets posted on YouTube and on my website as well.
Awesome. That sounds awesome. That's really great. It's another opportunity for drinking and Jewish interests colliding, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right. Well, Rabbi Litvin, this has really been quite the blast. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Awesome. And here we go. L'chaim.
L'chaim.